All right, so listen, welcome everybody. I'm Brian Hayes coming to you live from Bridgeport, Connecticut, Steel Point, in the loft here. Figured I'd do this from the loft floor here in our 30,000 square foot production and distribution center here in Connecticut. Jackson Benvenutti has joined me. Actually, just moved out to uh, California, and welcome, Jackson. Thanks for joining in and sharing some of your expertise as a past North American champion. So.
Yeah, it's good to be back sailing in the Flying Scot class again a little bit. It's been kind of a while, but it's a class that's very near and dear to my heart. I've probably spent more hours in the Flying Scot than any other boat I sail, I guess. Um, and it's great to have Brian here with us. He's Flying Scot, Mr. Flying Scot extraordinaire. And we're going to go over a few things tonight. We got a little bit of a Midwinters recap, how all that went, and maybe some lessons learned from Brian, who was there. Including the 3 tips from the Midwinters. And then we're going to talk about the NACs and the junior NACs, a little bit about the venue, the conditions, some social aspects, some housing stuff, kind of just logistical kind of stuff, and also maybe a little bit of sailing tips here and there throughout it.
Yeah, and I think at the end, Jackson, I think we had a bunch of people submit some questions, and we'll hopefully at the end we'll get through a few of those questions and try to check some of those off the bullet points. So we're definitely trying to keep this under an hour. So why don't we kind of charge ahead here and get going? So first thing is, Midwinters this year. I've been to probably, I don't know, 20 or so Midwinters over the past 35 years, a variety of different places. I started going down in Panama City, and then we had them in St. Pete for a while, and Sarasota, and just a eclectic mix of different places. And this year they class in my estimation, a pretty brilliant idea, and moved them to Lake Eustis and tied them in with the George Washington Regatta, which is always a well-tended Florida circuit event. I got to tell you, Jackson, you missed a really incredibly well-run regatta. The weather didn't cooperate, and when the weather was that uncomfortable, and you come away from that event saying what a great job everybody did, that just means it was just a well-run regatta. So if anybody has or hasn't been to Lake Eustis, just a couple of aerial shots that generally get you an idea about the lake. It's you can see here, the parking area is just full of boats. They did a great job working with the church across the street to create a convenient place for people to park. 2 ramps, they had moorings and stuff like just a really well run event. A lot of fun, and hopefully you can see on the what is my right hand side, the size of the lake. I start thinking about lakes in Florida, and I'm thinking, boy, it can't be that big. And boy, sure enough, Lake Eustis is plenty big enough to have a 70 and 80 boat Flying Scot regatta without bumping into anybody. So pretty impressive. They're just a bunch of very passionate people at Lake Eustis, and I'm not sure what the plans are moving forward, but I sure do hope that maybe the class considers, going back there for a midwinters. It's very economically kind of a good spot, and just a very humble, fun place to sail. So, Jackson, have you been to Lake Eustis? Have you done that yet?
I actually have not. I've heard a lot about it actually, but I've never been.
Yeah.
It's something I feel like I would enjoy quite a bit. Was it kind of similar to sailing on Lake Norman where the NACs were last year, or a
It
bit smaller than that?
just different. It's a little bit more wide open,
Mm-hmm.
and it's as challenging, and we'll get into that here a little bit for sure. But just again, just a really fun time, and congratulations to the class for kind of making a decision to go down there and do that. Just want to throw a couple of shout outs. Ray Laguna, who's there in the kind of the vanilla colored vest there, ran the regatta, and Ray is getting the Sandy Douglas Sportsmanship Award here, and it was well deserved. I mean, he was very passionate about making sure everybody had a good time, everything was clear, and as you think about running events, Ray definitely deserved to win the Sportsmanship Award. It was voted on by the peers, and you know, rain and cold and wind and no wind, Ray was there to make sure everybody's having a good time. So just wanted to recognize him and his entire committee there. They were again above board. Very, very fun place to be. So if they go back there at some point, and you guys are listening in, put it on your docket. I didn't see any alligators. Jeff Litton told me that I need to worry more about the snakes than the alligators, so I didn't see any of those either. So, but a good time for sure. The results, again, hats off. Tyler and Carrie were outstanding, and you can see by their results, they started out good and just got better and better and better. And, when you're sailing on a lake, to have those kind of results, that consistency, just really, really, well sailed, just smart and consistent. And we'll talk a little bit about, some of the reasons why they did so well there. Um, the second name is Brett Barbahead. You may not recognize Brett, and his wife, Mary, and Jay Lurie. Jay and I go back decades. He and I won a Lightning North Americans back in the early 90s together, and just a really good team. Brett's new to the Flying Scot, Thistle sailor, and sailed out of Riverton, New Jersey, to come in there and really, be in the running to win this event. And is kind of right out of the gates is really impressive. But he's just a great sailor, fun to be with. We had a dinner with him and his team one night, and it was good to see Brett there. And he's very excited about the class. So just a great addition for the class. And then we tripped into third, and I just wanted to put this up because Teresa, who sailed with me, had never been in a Flying Scot before. Flew in from Chicago because my regular cruise couldn't make it, and never been in the boat before. And she was just amazing, very calm, and learned a lot. I think she learned a lot, but it was fun to have her on board. And Jackson, you know Teresa's sister, Monica.
I
Monica
do.
Moore.
I do. We've done a lot of sailing together on Etchells,
So,
Lightnings, J70s, all kinds of different boats.
lot of talent runs in that family. So again,
Hmm.
that was the top three in the championship division and the top three in the challengers. Sorry, Henry and Jeff. Again, an awesome series. Got a little bit behind the eight ball on that first day, a little lighter, a little bit more challenging. The breeze came out of the north on the last day, and just came on, tied Dave and Carol for first, and won the tiebreaker with first. So Forrest in third, again consistent, couple points ahead, fourth place. So I think generally speaking, everybody had a really good time. And in general, again, the big message I have for everybody is that if you get a chance to go down to Midwinters, uh, go down and do it. It's a lot of fun, a lot of social stuff, and generally just good sailing. So
And y'all had a really good turnout for that event, right? It was like 85-ish boats, maybe.
I think we had 81 registered, 75
Okay.
kind of showed up. And then,
Okay.
there were a few folks that, I'll be honest with you, Jackson, the weather was incredibly uncooperative the last 2 days specifically. And
Hmm.
some folks had as much fun as they cared to have come Sunday morning when it was cold and rainy and stuff. But they
Hmm.
still, everybody hung around for all the social stuff. And that's honestly what a lot of this is all about.
Yeah.
So
I mean, honestly, looking at the rest of the fleets in the country, 70-ish boats. That's fantastic.
yeah,
That's really
absolutely.
cool to be able to sail against that many boats.
Yeah. And you and I talked about it in Albie too, is, the kind of the Flying Scot class was the talk of the sailing circles there to get that many boats to go down to a midwinter. So definitely doing a lot of things right. So, and you and I talked, Jackson, and, I kind of said, there were three things that got reinforced. I've been trying to sail the boat a whole lot more in the past couple of years and was able to get down to Davis Island and, obviously sailed this event and, planning on doing the Great 48 and then, the NACs as well. But there were three things that stuck out to me, during the event. And, maybe we can kind of touch a little bit on these things that probably could have, helped a lot. One was, and I talked to you about this, the first day on the first race on Sunday, and this isn't pictures of me, by the way. This is actually Brent at Davis Island. But it kind of illustrates the problem. And the picture on the left is Brent, and he had a pretty loose jib halyard. It was blowing about 10 or 12 on that practice day. And unfortunately, this is how I was set up the first race on Sunday. And we were slow. We were painfully slow. And Jackson, we talked a little bit about what your thoughts were on this, and maybe you want to share a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a Flying Scot, I almost always just set the jib halyard so that it's got those three little crow's feet coming off of each wrinkle, just hints of crow's feet coming off. And because of the way the crank halyard system works, sometimes it won't get perfect. So, you're trying to dial it in. Maybe you crank it up a little bit harder and then back it back down again, just so you can get right to that perfect look of those three crow's feet hanging off the hanks in the middle there, the snaps in the middle. And what you just circled, Brian, is a clear like scallop. Like it's pretty loose right there. You can see the jib luff projecting in front of the headstay a little bit. And I think that makes the sail with a really flat entry which makes it kind of hard to drive at times. It's hard to find a groove. It's hard to stay in the groove. And maybe if it's really flat water, you can get away with a little looser than the really three, like, crow's feet coming off each snap in the middle of the luff of the jib. But that, even in really flat water, that might be a bit excessive in my opinion. You can see the wrinkles at the bottom of your circle traveling pretty far aft from the luff of the jib. And that just means that you're making the entry really flat, and it's going to be hard to drive. And the sail shape that's designed into it is you're kind of manipulating it into a way that isn't designed for it to be. So it's never really a good thing. The only time I'd ever tighten the jib halyard in a Flying Scot to where if you were overpowered, I would tension it just so that it's smooth, like in this picture on the right. It looks like the crow's feet have just barely been pulled out. Maybe you could go another click, but you don't want to get too tight. The tightest I would ever go is just till the luff of the sail is smooth, for sure. I mean, what's your experience, Brian? Is that what you found out
Well,
at
for
the
sure. And,
Midwinters?
I think, Jackson, one of the things I see a lot, and especially folks sailing on flat water and in lakes where it's shifty and kind of chasing puffs around, I see a lot of folks sailing with a looser halyard like this. And it can work, like you and I talked about, if you're kind of reaching around, getting to the next puff. But I find it to be very challenging to drive to. And I think that was my downfall in that first race on Sunday, was that I just couldn't get in the groove. And, you know, shame on me. Like I said, usually what we would do is, the first going downwind or whatever, we would fix that, right? And stuff. But with Teresa being new and it being a little bit breezier and a little bit shiftier, I just didn't get to it. And, so we kind of struggled through it. It was an interesting lesson for me to learn, I think, or relearn, if you will, is that,
Right.
I'm always hunting for those, like you said, those two little crow's feet and those two or three snaps. The picture on the right, this is Brent. A couple minutes later, he had tightened the halyard a little bit. You can see that, like Jackson was talking about, much tighter, probably too tight. If we talk about, a lot of folks talk about sailing light and depower, and if you're sailing light and you're in breeze and your jib looks like the picture on the left, you're not depowering. You're adding a lot of power to the jib, and so generally speaking, you start cranking the jib halyard up, the sail, the draft's going to move forward. The jib is going to twist a little bit more in the top and kind of depower a little bit. And so that's probably, maybe max cranked, I guess, maybe on the right-hand side. But
Probably.
the idea being kind of one extreme to the other. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when it gets wavy, especially, you can't have it like the picture on the left, because the boat's hitting waves, it's slowing down, it's speeding up. The head stays flying through the air at different angles and different speeds, and it just makes the angle, the apparent wind angles moving around a little bit. So it just really makes it hard to find that groove and keep the boat there.
yeah. So I think the one thing, I think we both kind of agree, if someone's struggling, maybe they're even having struggling with pointing. Sometimes it just might be a little half a click or a click on your jib halyard to make the boat easier to drive to and get it going, so you're going faster through the water. So that was kind of one thing that I came away with, kind of kicking myself still, a month later, that I wish I had kind of made the adjustment, but kind of lesson learned, right? So the second thing, and we talk a lot about this, and we actually had a few questions about this coming into this webinar, so we kind of wanted to touch upon it, and it's the Vang, Jackson. And as a kid growing up sailing Flying Scots, you know all too well about the importance of the Vang, and maybe just give a little quick 2 or 3 minute summary about how you use the Vang and the importance of it.
Yeah, I think if we were to start out in the lighter era, when you're always think about boats as either looking for power or overpowered. It's very, very rare that it's dialed in perfectly. And if it is, then the wind changes and then it's not again, right? So when you're looking for power, I would always set the Vang so that it just barely had some slack in it, just a small loop, essentially, when you're properly going upwind, properly trimmed in and hiking and all that stuff. And then when you ease it to power the main up, it would just catch it, right? Just barely catch the boom, just barely take some tension. And that's the setting until you're overpowered, pretty much, right? And then as soon as you're overpowered, we're pulling the Vang on pretty darn hard. And what that's going to do is it's going to bend the boom, and it's going to bend the mast, which is going to flatten out the sails in both directions. And it's also going to engage the leech. So when you bring the Vang on hard, the leech gets engaged, and now you're sheeting the main out. It's going to make the main sheet easier to play because the vang is taking a lot of the load off the main sheet, and it's treating the boom almost like a barn door. It's going in and out. It's not going to go up. And so that's kind of the look you're looking for as soon as you're overpowered, so that you can ease the main, depower the boat, and the leech still stays engaged. So the boat tracks really nicely and continues to create the boat going up and not swimming around, right? Because the leech is engaged. This picture or this
Yes.
video, I guess you're about to play right now, Brian?
Right. So
Or
this is again from that practice day before Davis Island. And thank goodness for Davis Island doing that regatta the month before, so we could kind of shake some of this, the dust off of remembering how to sail. But I went out, and this was Keith and Kevin. They were out practicing the day before. And we're not trying to point out anything wrong, but these guys were kind enough to kind of show us what I think Jackson and I agree we wouldn't necessarily be looking for vang tension in this situation. So let's see if we can get this to play. And you can see they're doing a good job moving the main sheet and stuff. But a couple of things you may want to focus on when you're looking at this, and we're just going to keep kind of playing in a loop here, is you look at the leech profile here, and I don't know if you could see, but it's kind of open, and the vang, the height of the boom off the deck, right, Jackson? And we're kind of focused on that. And by the way, I have another video right after this, and these are taken within minutes of each other. So they're basically in the exact same condition. And not for nothing, if you're looking at these guys going upwind, you're going, wow, they look pretty good. They're sailing the boat flat, and they look like they're under control. And generally they are, but I think that they're losing a lot of power and a lot of point, and actually sailing with the sails a little bit too full. So let's just run this again a little bit. And if you can, maybe watch the end of the boom and the lower part of the leech and how it kind of pumps. And see how the leech is kind of pumping there.
If you watch the numbers, you can see it a little bit easier as the numbers change to the perspective of the camera, and watching the back tip of the boom moving around a little bit as well.
And so in this scenario, Jackson, my inclination is to kind of, when I start seeing this, I start seeing the boom shaking, even if it's blowing 8 or 10 or whatever. It's not a factor of crew weight. It's a factor of how much power you're putting into the boat. So these two, this team here, even though they're sailing flat, if they had pulled the vang on harder, this bottom portion of the main, first of all, the leech profile is going to get more consistent. It's not going to change and pump in and out. And secondly, when you pull the vang on, the sail starts to get flatter. Okay, the mast bends, the sail gets flatter. So you start thinking, well, I'm tightening the leech, I'm going to power up the sail. But thankfully, the boom also pushes the mast forward and flattens the sail. And I think, Jackson, you were the one who noted to me that you could actually see, and it'd be better if it had stripes, but you can see that the depth of the main versus this next video. So again, what we're looking for here on this is just kind of watching the leech profile, watching the height of the boom, and kind of watching it every time they hit a wave, and again, doing a reasonably good job of moving the main sheet in and out, but it's almost like they're hunting for power.
Yeah, sometimes when the vang's really loose, it's hard to get the boat to track. It kind of like changes angle of heel pretty easily, and it kind of swims around. It's hard to find the groove for the driver. And what you saw is just kind of what happens. And I think you'll see a little bit of a difference here on this next video.
Okay, so this is Brent. This is again Davis Island, and again, probably his first time we've even sailed this boat. Probably some of this comes from the Thistle. Very consistent heel angle, and you can see how much he dumps that main, and the boom height doesn't go up at all. So I think, Jackson, you and I were noting here too. It's blowing the boat about 8 or 12 here, somewhere between that, and the distance the boom is off the transom going upwind, right?
Right. Yeah, the pull the vang on hard, you're actually going to sheet the main out farther, right? Because it's less twisty. It's a little bit more powerful. So you sheet it out, but the leech is engaged, which helps keeps the boat tracking upwind and not bearing off and coming back up. It creates a little bit of a better groove for the driver.
The other thing I noticed here, Jackson, which I actually didn't engage until just now, is these overbend wrinkles, right? In the lower third of the mast, right? So that means that this vang is not only pulling the end of the boom down, but it's pushing the mast forward, and that's bending this lower section.
Absolutely. And I think also, those wrinkles are they're pretty pretty prevalent and they're pretty long, and they go pretty high up for considering this wind strength. So it makes me wonder if the main halyard isn't all the way up as well. And if you look at the top of the mast, I think that you can kind of see it's down a little bit. So paying attention to the wrinkles in your sails will tell a great story, right? So if you don't have the vang on enough, you won't see those wrinkles. Or if you have the vang on and the main halyard's down a little bit, you'll see a lot of them. They're going pretty far aft, right, Brian? Do you have a suggestion for how to get the main halyard all the way up? I think you have a little nice trick, don't you?
Well, so this is from Albie, right? Al Terhune,
Yep.
and when he was sailing the boat a lot more frequently a couple of years ago, and Al grew up sailing Flying Scots as well. So, but when I'm actually hoisting my main at the dock, I actually take the gooseneck pin out and let the boom float, and I crank the main all the way up to the top, and then pin it, and then I take the boom and I click it back down into the track. And the reason I do that is, if someone's sailing around with a main that's a year or 2 or 3 years old, the bolt ropes shrink. They just do. They get as the rope gets water and dries and heats up and dries, that polyester rope in the luff of these sails shrink. And so what ends up happening is people start cranking the sails up and they meet resistance. And they get to a point where they're trying to pull it pretty hard and they can't get it up anymore. So they stop because they've met enough resistance. Whereas if they pull the pin out and cranked it all the way up, then push the pin down, they would actually stretch that rope or pull tension in that rope. Again, I don't think tension in the rope is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's actually a good thing. I think it does a bunch of things that are good for the sail and for the compression of the mast. But generally speaking, I think that most people don't pull their mains up high enough. And the other thing too, just like everything else, if it's up too high, it's a whole lot easier to let it down a click or two than it is to try to get it back up, in my humble opinion. So.
Absolutely. And you're just talking about pulling the pin on the gooseneck and letting it go up like an inch or two. The boom's still attached to the mast, right?
Yeah, I mean,
get the halyard up and then click it back in.
Yeah, I mean, if I pull the pin out and I crank it up, and if it comes out of the track, I just put it back in the track. I mean, I'm doing it at the dock where there's no tension and no load on it. So again, that's just something I just want to get it all the way up so I have more control over the leech. And I don't like dropping the main at all. I think it changes the profile of you start dropping the main halyard down, the end of the boom drops down, the sheeting angles change, and it's just not, it doesn't balance the boat quite right. So
I agree completely. I've never dropped the main halyard on purpose.
But, just going to run this video again here real quick for you guys, 2 more loops. And you can see, Brett very aggressive on the main sheet. It gets hit with a little puff. The boat starts loading up and he's letting it out, foot, 2 foot, 3 feet if he has to, just to get that angle of heel consistent. And, we talk about the importance of the vang, and this is our gear changer. This is what we're able to do to change gears and to depower the boat. So if you're sailing lighter, and it's 8 knots of breeze, like Jeff and Amy, they're going to be pulling on the vang hard. If it's 8 knots of breeze, I may not be pulling the vang on as hard. And, kind of the last tip, and Jackson alluded to this, is that when you let the main out, and if you're up on the rail, like these guys are here, and you let the main out and the boom lifts, you need more vang. Okay. Because you're already depowering the boat with your weight. And Jackson alluded to the barn door effect. That's what you want to do. You don't want your leech profile changing. You want your angle of attack changing. So, makes sense, Jackson?
Absolutely. I mean, the vang is pretty much, besides the 2 sheets, it's the largest control you have on the boat. And so, if it's a puffy condition, I think you're playing the vang a lot. As soon as you're fully overpowered, though, that thing goes on till you look like you're about to break the boom. And then you're like, maybe pull it on another inch or something, but remember to ease it off around the weather mark. That's horrible. The boom will break. But, I think that's a huge factor in the Flying Scot once the boat's overpowered. And I think most of the sailors probably don't utilize that control enough or frequent enough.
I think you and I were talking, I think when you sailed, I think it was with Andrew, won the NACS at CPYC 8-10 years ago or whatever. There was one question that someone was asking you during the puffy day, how much did you play the vang? And I think you told me, what was it? Like,
I think I touched it or adjusted it like 50 times a beat. It was very puffy. It was really windy where you're overpowered, and then you're underpowered, and then you're overpowered, and you're underpowered, and everywhere in between. So, Andrew was driving, and I was playing the vang to help keep the boat at a constant angle of heel, keep the boat on its feet. and make sure that the mainsail was looking right through the very large range of conditions that we had. So, I mean, besides playing the jib sheets or the main sheet, the Vang is your next best tool to use, right?
Yeah,
So
that's one
use it.
thing too. I think some people like the crew, you could actually work on working as a team, and the crew can play the Vang like you're talking about. And that can,
Absolutely.
free up the skipper to play the main sheet and pull the Vang on and off. So anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but again, I can't underemphasize enough the importance of getting a clear understanding. And, if you're light and you're getting overpowered, you got to pull the Vang on. And when you think you pulled it on hard enough, you probably want to pull it on more. So when you let the sheet out, if the boom lifts up at the end and you're hiking hard, then you probably need more Vang. So
I've got one last question for you, Brian.
Yep.
When you pull the Vang on, you bend the mast, you bend the boom, and these wrinkles along the luff and the bottom quarter of the luff get more exemplified. How much would you be pulling the Cunningham on here in this shot? And if so, how much?
I do. And, it's a good question. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we got a lot to get through here in an hour. But, Jackson, as you know, every time you bend the mast, the draft moves back. Okay.
Right.
And when you're putting the Vang on, as you can see by those wrinkles there, the mast is bending down low. And when you start getting 90-degree wrinkles like that off the mast, it's time to go to the Cunningham. And what that enables you to do, when you pull the Cunningham on, it pulls the draft of the sail forward, which opens up the leach. And we keep talking about lighter crews and how do you depower? What are some of your techniques? Well, obviously, as you can see, even with 3 up, these guys have the end of the boom way off the corner of the boat and 10 to 12 knots of breeze. And in this scenario, I mean, I would have told them to pull the main up higher, but
Right.
short of that,
there you go.
A little bit more breeze. Their next step is to start pulling some Cunningham on and get the draft further forward. Let the top of the sail open up. It's one of the nice things I think with the RHC, the radial main, is with the radial head. When you start pulling on that radial panel, it actually a much quicker direct effect than a cross-cut sail at the top. And that's one of the reasons that we incorporated the radial heads there, is that when you pull the Cunningham on, the top twists quicker because the panels are kind of more aligned with the direction of where the cloth needs to go to have an effect on that. So it's a good point, Jackson. When the mast bends and you start pulling the Vang on, you probably need to pull some Cunningham on. And those 90-degree wrinkles are a good indicator. And if it's 2 people and you're light and it's blowing 12, you might pull the Cunningham on pretty hard right there. It's not wind condition. It's what your weight versus the amount of load on the boat. So fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So this is the last kind of tip I got. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. And, lesson number 3, lake sailing, committing versus covering. It's just kind of weighed on my mind a little bit. I a little bit of a pity party is I probably, the last 100 yards of every race and the finish going upwind, I lost a bunch of boats. I actually talked to Jackson about this, not sure if we lost anywhere from 6 to 10 boats going up the last 150 yards of the beat. And so a couple of things that I came away with from sailing a lake is obviously upwind, avoid the temptation to chase the wind you can't get to. There's big puff on the left-hand side and everybody's like, oh, we got to go all the way to the left. And invariably what ends up happening, Jackson, is that, what happens is that the wind goes way to the left and it's on the right. So I think, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but certainly on a lake, you got to kind of commit to a side and go win your side. And sometimes that means you're 20th, but at least you're winning, you're beating those other boats in that area, right? So
yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. I kind of think of these conditions as every dog has its day until the very end of the leg, whether it's upwind or downwind. And as long as you still have room to go on your side and be patient for it to come back, usually the better off you are, because every dog has its day. Eventually it will come back, right? Sometimes the right has the pressure and sometimes the left has the pressure. But oftentimes, especially in the middle of the beat, often when you're looking the worst and you're starting to get real freaked out is when it's about to look great for you, so just be patient and let nature do its thing. And until you absolutely have to tack, if you're running fully into the ley line, I think you're just trying to wait, because the longer you wait, the more likely it is to come back.
A lot of patience.
Mhm.
Downwind, I found a little bit the opposite, at least at this event. Downwind, basically using the boats behind me as a indicator of where the good breeze is coming from. Obviously, going downwind, you're going to see half as many shifts and half as many puffs because you're going with them. And if I see, if I saw a bunch of wind getting carried down one side of the course, try to be in the middle until we saw something dramatic happen. Then we would edge our way towards that next edge of that breeze, and that seemed to be pretty effective getting downwind. I think getting stuck in the dead middle is always a problem and a concern. We always try to get a little bit to an edge going downwind and kind of playing that side, if you will, but kind of concentrating on where the puffs are coming down that zone that you were in and making sure you got lined up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think upwind and downwind, you're kind of trying to get to a side, just because of the nature of how wind moves around different objects. If you're in the middle, wind's going around the edges, or it's going around the edge of a pack, or it's going over and around the edges. So generally, there's just less pressure when the boats are together or in the middle of the course. Um, and I think also you made a good point about going downwind, looking back upwind to seeing what's going on behind you. The same thing when you're going upwind in these conditions. I'm constantly looking upwind as far as I can see to the lake's edge and seeing, getting a feel for where the puffs come down off the land onto the lake, and you can see the pressure start to kind of, I call it brewing, like it's about to start blowing down the course, and paying attention to that and trying to figure out, is the puff brewing on the left or the right next, and always looking as long as you can and as much as you can, and that generally will give you the best plan of attack going forward. But you have to keep your eyes looking upwind and downwind, and using the other boats as telltales, whether they're in more pressure or what the angle is and that kind of stuff. But mainly it's just get to the pressure in these kind of shifty conditions. And once you get there, it's obvious it's either going to be a major header or a major lift. So you just kind of stay with what you have until the next one comes.
And also to that kind of point, keep focused on going fast wherever you are and wait your turn. I think that's
Right.
where a lot of people kind of fall apart a little bit. I see a little lack of concentration. Sometimes things look really bad, and you just have to keep the boat going as fast as you can. Every 2 or 3 or 4 boat lengths that you can gain by the boats around you and waiting for your next opportunity makes a big difference. And I think that's where some of the better the people in the fleet who have better results seem to just keep focus on going fast. And some of the folks that may struggle a little bit with consistent finishes get a little frustrated, or this wind doesn't go their way and they start chatting too much in the boat. I say that I start calling it the boat gets small, right? Because everybody in the boat starts looking, the circle doesn't get as big and looking for opportunities because you're in a bad way. So so just kind of keep going fast, whatever you do. All the tips that you hear from all the different top sailors, keep working on making sure the boat goes fast and wait for your turn, the next puff that's going to go through and consolidate with it. So, I learned this lesson, I guess the second race, when you're ahead, you can't cover everyone, so beat the ones you can control. And, I think it might have possibly been the furthest I ever have been ahead in a Flying Scot race in my entire life. And I got way far ahead way too soon. And I ended up going up the last beat, covered the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth place boats, and thought we had the seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th place boats under control. And you can't cover them. The lake gets big when you're that far ahead, and the fleets get a couple of people got some leverage on you, and we kind of lost our big lead. But it was a good lesson to learn, is that, I wouldn't do it any differently. I would still stick with the boats that were 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And, you don't have any control over people who get to an edge and take advantage of their puff. So, you can't cover everybody. So, but beat the ones you can control. And when you're behind, you usually can't pass them all. So kind of focus on the ones you can pass. Get that little group of 3, 4, 5, 6. And the last bullet point here is this: towards the end of the beats, commit to a side, which again, I failed to do. And I saw a lot of people do a really good job of this. And Jackson, you were talking about, especially in lakes, getting to the top edge when we were talking the other day.
Right. Yeah. Coming out of a side is, you got to kind of play the odds, look upwind, see what the best bet you think is, and get to that side. The middle almost always loses because the pressure comes in from one side or the other, and the shift comes in with the pressure. or sometimes it comes down both sides and never in the middle, because as we talked earlier, I like to think about it as the wind is like lazy, right? It doesn't want to go through things. It doesn't want to go through a hard path. It wants to go up and over and around the edges, which is easier for it to travel. So being on an edge is usually the only way to go. And sometimes you bet wrong, sometimes you bet right, but the middle is almost always never the winner.
So the last race, Tyler and Carrie did an amazing job. They were bouncing around with a whole bunch of third, fourth, fifth, sixth plate boats, including us, and we bounced back, and they just kept working hard, got to the edge, got to led the group to their side, and won the race. They kept working to make sure they committed to their side and didn't go chase the guys who might have been reaching in from the other side. So again, talking about a lot of lake sailing and this kind of stuff, I think some of these bullet points are lessons I've kept relearning down at Lake Eustis. Try to incorporate them at Lake Norman at the Great 48. And maybe not as much at the North Americans, and lastly, remain calm, right? Bad things are bound to happen when you're sailing on the lake. Some really, really, really excellent sailors who've been very, very consistent at the top of the fleet didn't have all great consistent results. And that's just what happens on a lake. So you just got to kind of wait your turn. So,
Brian, I didn't know you were in the military.
that's
Good
me.
shot.
That's me a few years ago. Anyway, so that's a little bit about the stuff that I want to talk about the Midwinters, about half of this, and then I want to go into a little bit about the NACs. We're the North Americans are being held at CPYC. Class came to John Cook and his committee and asked them to host it, and they jumped up and said, "Yeah, we'll do it again." I've been involved with the past couple that we've run there. I think the Cedar Point Yacht Club does an amazing job. It's a very pretty place to sail. If you're going to sail Long Island Sound, it's probably the premier one design sailing facility on Long Island Sound. There's probably other places that might say differently, but I tend to think Cedar Point is probably the best place to sail one designs. So we're going to talk a little bit about the location, the race course, the facilities that Cedar Point has, and local conditions first. So just going to go through this a little bit quickly here. This is a kind of an aerial view of Cedar Point Yacht Club. The yacht club has got the red dot there. There's a pavilion to the left of it where a lot of the social functions will be held. As you can see, all those little white dots and blue covers are sailboats, Lightning, Thistles, Stars, Flying Scots. I think there's 15 Flying Scots in the fleet now. Whole bunch of little arrows and lasers and stuff. It's a pretty sailing club. So they're out, racing every Saturday and Sunday from Memorial Day all the way through Labor Day plus. And so they have really top-notch people who know how to run races, a lot of resources, mark set bot for the pin. So just a lot of really cool things that are going to be able to be incorporated. It's kind of sailing. This is kind of a little bit of view here. This is Bikini Island. We'll talk a little bit about that here. So when you get here, and hopefully a whole bunch of you are going to join us at Cedar Point for the NAs. We'd love to have you come here and do it with us. But if you bear with me 1 second, when you're leaving the club here, you're going to kind of sail out here, and you can see there's a channel here, and you're going to kind of follow this all the way around past Topo Beach and out into basically Sea Mark here. All these little things here that you may or may not be able to see, all those little numbers, they say a half, which means shallow. So you definitely don't want to cut that sandbar. You can at very, very high tide. But generally speaking, especially if you don't have a kick-up rudder and stuff, generally speaking, most folks go around the channel. So a little bit of a loop-de-loop to get around, but it's a very pleasant sail to get out to the race course. Go to the next slide here. I'm going to go to my annotation, so bear with me. Having fun yet, Jackson?
I'm having a great time. I mean,
right.
It's great to see the charts of Cedar Point Yacht Club again. I haven't been there since 2011, I don't think.
Yeah, so we're going to be sailing circles a little bit big, but obviously we won't be sailing in the land there, but that's the general sailing area. Hopefully you guys can see the circle. And the important thing to kind of recognize here is, and those of us who were here at the last nationals here, this is a reef. And George's Rock is over here. There's a bell here. So anyway, long story short, this is a rocky reef, and you'll know it's a rocky reef at low tide because you see the rocks. So we're going to probably be avoiding that, stay basically more down in this area. The wind shifts, and obviously we'll have to take advantage of as much thing, but there's plenty of bay and plenty of water to sail in here. This is still Long Island Sound, but the reef and this area kind of block it a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk a little bit about the sailing venue in the area. So that's the general glimpse. It's probably, with 6 knots of breeze, it's probably a 25 to 35-minute sail to the race course, depending on the wind direction. If it's a southwest breeze, going to have to go all the way out towards Frost Point there to get a nice long beat. And if it's southeast, which has been more prevalent in the past couple of years, it's not that far. We're just going to get off Campo Beach and maybe a little bit east of there, Sherwood Point. So, talk a little bit about tide and current. We're going to, it's much different than Lake Eustis or Deep Creek or Lake Norman. The water moves. And if anybody knows about water moving, it's Jackson, having sailed at the College of Charleston. So Jackson, you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we need to be cognizant of with the current at
Yeah,
Long Island
I
Sound?
think absolutely. I think that obviously you want to know what time it changes, and what the tidal range is, and kind of know what to look for if it's changing, trying to find a crab trap, or I guess lobster traps in Long Island Sound, or anything anchored, and just keeping the check on it. Is it getting faster? Is it getting slower? Is it about to change? Has it changed? And then obviously, of course, on the starting line, is it pushing you over or under the line, or is it pushing you into the pin or into the boat? And realizing that maybe it's a little too dangerous to start down near the pin if the current's holding you down off the line. It's going to be hard to lay it, right? Things like that. And also at the ley lines, every time you get to a turning mark, it's important to realize that you might be getting set one way or the other. If you have the ability to get a transit through the mark, I think that's a really great idea. If you have the shoreline behind the mark, see if you're pointing at the mark and the land's moving behind the mark, you might be pointing at the mark, but you're not actually heading at the mark. So, just all those little tips and tricks. And I think Brian and I will probably go into a little bit more of that as we see the conditions each day and the daily morning briefings at the NACs, right, Brian?
Yeah, so every morning we'll be we're going to sign up to do morning briefings. We'll talk about the current day's weather. We'll give the PRO a chance to give everybody an idea about what they're thinking, if they want to talk about what their schedule is. We'll talk about tides and current. And the thing you brought up, Jackson, too, and we see this a lot, especially folks, any of you guys coming from lakes, they're getting towards the ley line and they're pointing at the weather mark, and they're going against the current, and they get on the starboard ley line that's 200 yards away, and they're making it, and then they're not making it, and then they start pinching, and they're trying to make it, and they're trying to make it, and they start going slower, and the slower you go, the more the water pushes you, and you end up with pileups. So, it's things that, you get there for a day or two early, maybe practice a little bit and get an idea how hard the water's flowing. This is just a tide chart below of give you an idea how much water moves in and out of Long Island Sound and the western part of Long Island Sound, Midwestern part. And that's about 8 feet of tide on April 7th and 8th. So the water can move. It ain't moving as much as it is on this red nun. That was just for effect. But it's moving. And so we'll give you guys a little better idea about what we think, and give you a little idea of visuals about tide charts and what we can expect out of the Saugatuck River and the effects when you're there, and give you a good idea, at least about what to expect. So
you mean we're not going to be sailing in the Mississippi River like that picture was taken?
or Savannah
That
or
was a
something like
lot.
that. So, yeah, so we talk about the wind and weather. I'm not going to get into weather so too much. Typically in the end of June, it's very pleasant in southern New England. It's mid 70s, maybe 80. Occasionally it'll touch 90, but not rarity. Evenings are usually in the 60s. It's probably going to rain a day. Maybe it won't, but usually it will. And wind gusts. The last time we had there was a little bit of an anomaly. A cold front came through, and that's what you get. You get cold front conditions. But I would expect normal week for a week condition is anywhere from 6 to 12 and building to 14. And with no guarantees that's what's going to happen, but that would be a typical thing. So going to get a little bit more details here as we're getting towards the close of the webinar. I appreciate you guys hanging in for, it's going to hit the 45-minute mark, and Nick, you've got a couple chats here. I'll have to get to those in a second, but we're going to talk a little bit about the NAC registration details, the social schedule, and brief tips. It's some of the housing options. So I'm going to leave this up for a second. You can scan this with your phone if you're bored, or you can go back. We post all of these webinars on the North Sales YouTube page. You can obviously go to FSAA and find the registration, the NOR information and stuff like that. The important thing to know, when people read the NOR, it's an invitation and basically giving you information about what to expect. And you'll see in the NOR, the start times every morning are 10 o'clock in the morning, which I understand may sound god awful, especially if you're on holiday. Some people like it. Some people think that's nuts. The reality is the first race, the first day is scheduled to start 11, and that makes sense. Before each day, the night before, the regatta organizers will inform everybody whether the start time will be moved or not. You could usually expect an afternoon sea breeze, but you could also expect no breeze in the afternoon and better breeze in the morning. And having a scheduled 10 o'clock means that they don't have to make any movements pulling things forward. And it's much easier to push stuff back the night before and say, hey guys, we're starting at 11, or we're starting at 11:30, or we won't start before whatever, and give everybody a little better read. John Cook, who's the regatta organizer, I asked him to start a WhatsApp group, and you'll be able to sign up for the WhatsApp group when you're there at the event. And the WhatsApp group will be unofficial notifications to the thing. The keg is tapped. The dinner's being served at 6. We're pushing start back time to 11. So all that's going to be available in a WhatsApp group to the competitors, just an effort to keep everybody better informed of what's going on. So just better communication, hopefully more pleasant experience. Here's a social event, just a casual welcome reception on Sunday. There's going to be obviously measurement, registration, all that stuff. Each morning there'll be a light breakfast. Monday we have the pizza truck, so after racing you come in, you eat as much pizza as you dare. The pizza truck will be there, open to all competitors. Tuesday again, another light breakfast. Tuesday is the lobster bake, scheduled for lobster bake under the pavilion. That is not included in the entry fee. That will be additional fee because, it's a lobster bake and it gets pricey. So we're going to get a count for people who want to do the lobster bake, and hopefully you guys can sign up for that. It's been very well received every year we've done it, and just part of a New England tradition. Wednesday night, morning breakfast, open night on Wednesday. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And Thursday, again, a light breakfast, just, maybe muffins and that kind of stuff, and coffee, and then the awards, and then Tudi's Italian traditional dinner on Thursday night. So that's all kind of included, all in the race packet, including championship racing, beverages. We'll talk a little bit about that here. Lunches aren't provided. You can end up paying to pack your own lunch. There's going to be some few delis. We'll make sure you guys know about that on the weekend and where to get sandwiches. A lot of people just make, PBJs or whatever, but there isn't any lunchings planned right now. The club does have showers in the main clubhouse. I think there's 3 in each restroom. So you can always take a shower. It might be a little bit of a line, but hopefully people go through. There's no bar or restaurant. There is a snack bar, but there's no bar or restaurant. So what does that mean? If there's a particular beverage you fancy, you should bring your own. People have been known to bring wines and rums and miscellaneous other stuff. The club does not have a liquor license. They do provide, we should be able to, we'll be providing beer and other beverages, but anything that's beyond that, it's BYO. We don't have a bar to worry about to speak of, so there's no issues with that. So if you have something you want to pour into your red Solo cup, bring it along. Wednesday night is CPYC beer can racing. Anybody who belongs to a club that has beer can racing, the ritual is probably akin to people going to church on Easter and Christmas. They're going to come out in droves. The club's going to be there, and they're going to all be there pretty excited to go sailing and looking for parking spots, and potentially wondering why there are not any parking spots. So I don't think that the club wants to tell you to get out, but it's a great opportunity to explore the area. Downtown Norwalk has some great restaurants. There's some other things we can do. So it'd be a great afternoon to kind of sneak away from the club and go and adventure around southern New England. Be long nights. The sun doesn't set till late. There's water refill stations. We're trying to be a little bit more green. Obviously, it's not sanctioned green regatta, but I'll be bringing my own water bottles and stuff like that. And as I mentioned, it's likely to be too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, too sunny, too cloudy. Plan accordingly. It's New England. Um, so that's just a couple bullet points of things to know. If anybody has any questions, you can email myself or cpycodr@gmail.com. Again, cpycodr@gmail.com. We'll get to John Cook and he can answer any other questions. Let's see. This is accommodations, and this is probably the biggest hurdle. It's a challenge to get accommodations. We've got a couple rates at some local hotels. Even Hotel in Norwalk is probably the closest. It's about 8.5 miles to Club, and I say closest, closest under $200 a night. Nice hotel, clean, easy ride in, probably 15 minutes. You can reserve all that information. Actually, John just posted why this webinar was going on, the updated sheet with the accommodations. Norwalk Inn, very nice spot as well, very close, probably closest to the thing, a little bit more expensive. The Trumbull Marriott is a bit of a haul. It's probably 45 minutes. It's still closer than my house. I live about 5 minutes past that. But it's a full service Marriott that's got a pretty darn reasonable rate at $169 a night. There's a Hilton Garden Inn up near the Even Hotel. I don't know what the rate is on that, but it's probably $200 a night. Just this week, I was able to connect with an agreement with Sacred Heart University. They have 7 units available. They're 3-bedroom units. There's 5 single beds in each unit. So there's 3 bedrooms, 2 beds in 2 bedrooms, and 1 bed in another bedroom. Kind of kitchenettes, a common area, and it's dorms. They're dorms. You have to bring your own everything. There's no linens, no kitchen item, no toiletries, no towels. So you have to bring your own everything. There's a 1 week rental for $800 per unit. So if you have 2 teams and you want to save some money and you don't mind, the 35 to 40-minute drive every morning, it's $400 a team, and it's a brand new facility. They just finished building these dorms. They're very, very nice spots. You have to reach out to me to get these spots. There's only 7 available. And ideally, like I said, it'd probably be great to team up with another team. If you want, you could go onto the Sacred Heart website, which is listed there, and get an idea about what the units are like. But they're brand new. It looks like Yale or Harvard or Conn College. Very, very fancy stuff. Anyway, thanks to my wife and my daughter who both work at Sacred Heart, that we're able to get this connection. And hopefully we get some folks who maybe were struggling with the cost of the housing that they might want to share and kind of put that together. So that's where we are with housing options right now. I know some folks have booked Airbnbs. They gotten really thin. There's not too many right now. You never know with Airbnb and VRBO what might pop up. But anyway, I just wanted to get this information into your guys' hands. So let's see, what else do we have here, Jackson? Let me go to my next page. Sorry about this, guys. The junior NACs, if anybody knows, it's talked to me. I'm pretty passionate about this. I really want this to happen, but the only way for this to happen is with your guys' support. Last year we had the junior NACs. We got the minimum of 3 boats, and very thankful that those guys came and did this. We had a great championship. They got a bunch of really good races in a beautiful southeast breeze. Probably, got 6 races in a matter of, 4 races at that one day, 2 races the next day, and everybody's off the water by noon. The only criteria, it's all in the NOR, which is still we're still waiting to get back from the national committee. I think that John's expecting it back any day now, but we'll post that again. I really would like to get 6 teams. If anybody has any ideas about how to get a couple more junior teams there, please reach out to me. We'll get them boats, we'll get them sails, we'll get them whatever we need to get these kids on the water and enjoy the Flying Scot. In a nutshell, people are going to ask what the criteria is, and nobody on the boat can turn 20 in 2024. So 19 and under. If you turn 20 on December 31st, you don't qualify. And that's pretty much the criteria for a junior teen national championship. So that's the junior NACs. Again, please reach out to me if you guys have any ideas about getting a junior team or 2 involved. I'd love to hear from you. So real quick, we have about 5 minutes to burn through these, Jackson. So downwind with the chute light air. Do you go off wind, keep the jib engaged? 2 quick sentences.
Yes and no. If it's really light and the jib's not drawing at all and you have the sail with the pole near the head stay, I think you just drop the jib. And that especially works better with a tighter rig or a snug rib jib. If it's a loose rig setup, then the rig's gonna bounce around a bit more. But as soon as the jib can draw at all, I think that you're maybe having it up and just making sure that it's staying on the port side. Draw at all, I mean, by when you have the pole squared back. If the pole's forward, then the jib's in the way of the kite and the main, and it doesn't really work that great. If you have to sail angles downwind, consider dropping the jib, unless it's.
I think that's true. I think once it gets light enough that you have to start sailing angles and the jib is blocking the thing and there's no pressure in it, we take it down. I sail tight rig. My boat is fast. My rig is perfectly tuned. Trying to convince me to move to a snug rig. I don't think anybody would do that. I think the tight rig is pretty effective on lakes and flat water and lighter air. The problem with the tight rig, and again, we developed the tight rig jib back when we were developing the snug rig jib, and back when we were doing all this stuff. And the problem with the tight rig jib is when you get into big wind and big waves. Big wind, it's kind of hard to depower the boat. You sail with the jib luffing the whole time, or at least the first 8 inches of the jib luffing to get the boat, keep the boat on its feet. And downwind, if it's really, really windy, sailing with a lot of rig tension, 250, 280, sometimes the mast can get silly and invert down low. So that's how we a little bit got away from the tight rig. It's great in lakes, flat water. If you ever leave a lake and you want to power up and stuff, it could be really fast. So it has a lot to do with where you sail. But snug seems to be the best balance.
This person seems like they're going great. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know why you would want to. If you got something that works great for you, then stick with it. You're just gonna have to go through a learning curve. The only thing about the snug rig thing is I think that it can go through a wider variety of conditions and wave states as like a whole, right? The tight rig, like you said, is a little bit better in some specific conditions.
So how to best control the twist in the main and how much? You kind of a little bit went over that with hopefully with the vang, right? Twist is going to be controlled by main sheet and the vang, and how much. It's hard to tell. If you ever get a chance and you're curious, you want to hop in a power boat and follow somebody who's trimming the sails right, and then follow someone who's trimming the sails wrong. The idea behind these sail, basically setting up sails is have the leach profiles on the main and the jib match, so the wind sees one wing. And so if you have a twisty main and a closed leach jib, or a twisty jib and a closed leach main, it's not the wind isn't seeing one wing. And so that's kind of a way. That's how come you see these coach boats, whether it's a TP52 or a Snipe or whatever, they're behind the teams, and they're checking their sail trim by checking their leach profiles and checking their twist and stuff, and making sure that the trims are matching up. So again, it's vang and main sheet. When racing, why can my competitors point up more than me? That's a pretty hard question to answer.
Vague.
It's a multi thing. So, understanding pointing is not just pointing. It's not just trimming the sails in and pointing closer to the wind. It has a lot to do not only with the sails, but attaching laminar flow to the centerboard. And the more pressure and load you can put against the centerboard, the higher you're going to go. So just think of it, the harder pressure you can keep against the centerboard and keep that centerboard vertical as the boat's trying to push it to leeward, the centerboard's trying to push you to weather. And so the harder you push to leeward, it's going to try to push you harder to weather. So generally speaking, and again, this is a very complex question, but the faster you go, the higher you can go. And that's, some of it, and, obviously the other thing too, is trim your main. That's sometimes the easiest thing. If you're not sure, if you can't point and you're struggling with pointing, trim your main. If you look up and your top telltale's closed, your leech is hooked, then you're stalling the boat and ease your main. But generally speaking, those two things, thinking about what's going on underneath the boat with the pressure against the centerboard and the twist of the mainsail. So
making sure the board's all the way down, an inch and a half or 2 inches behind the hump in the Flying Scot, I think is a crucial thing as far as height goes. You want
to take the next bullet point there, Jackson? Vang sheeting?
Vang sheeting upwind in a breeze, effect on the mast, sail, how much is too much, how to determine proper vang tension in different wind speeds. So what the Vang does, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier in this presentation, is it bends the boom, right? The boom gets quite bendy and that flattens the foot of the main essentially, but it also pulls the boom into the mast, right? Like this, which bends the mast down low, which flattens the main even more. So you end up with a flatter sail shape, but the leech gets more engaged, right? Which is powering the main up a little bit. So now you got to sheet the mainsail out. How much is too much, I think, is if you're fully overpowered, I think that the only way to have too much is that things might break. I mean, I don't remember being able to pull it on, too much. Brian, have you ever pulled it on too much besides having something break? I
So,
mean,
uh,
or
uh,
it could send the mass really out of whack, out of column, I guess, but
so
it's a hard thing to kind of
a couple of
quantify.
years ago in Newport, I couldn't sail my boat, and Zeke couldn't get his boat up from Florida, and so he actually chartered my boat to sail that event up in Newport, and um, he basically said, yeah, I had a knot when I pulled the vang. I had a knot that would stop what I thought the maximum was. And so I would, when I got scared, I was going to pull it too much. And
Mm-hmm.
Zeke retied the knot. He said, you weren't pulling your vang hard enough. So, there's still a knot in my vang that stops me from quote unquote over pulling it. I don't know what that number is. Maybe Tyler or somebody would be better suited to kind of answer that before gear starts breaking. But um, I haven't, knock on off floor here. I haven't broken a boom or gooseneck yet. Just make
Yeah.
sure, like Jeff said, told me when you get to that weather mark, when you're 10 boat lengths away, take that vang off.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, the last 8 or 10 boat lengths, it's not going to matter, but it will matter a lot if you try to turn
Break the boom.
downwind and you don't have the vang off.
Right.
Real quick, tight, snug, and loose. We don't sail the loose rig anymore. I mean, we still have the original loose rig. The tight rig was advanced off the loose rig for Graham Hall, and we kind of built the tight rig, and the snug rig, we backed that down to loosen the tension on the head stay. The advantage, I think, of the snug rig, it gives you a much wider range of being able to sail in big breeze and light air and without having to mess around with stuff. The tight rig, I think it can be okay in lakes, flat water, but you may lose a little bit once you get people on the rail and you can't depower the boat enough. I struggle. I've never enjoyed sailing with the loose rig. The rig flopped around a lot, and light air. Every time you go upwind, you get hit with a wave, and then the head stay would straighten, and I'd lose all the power in the jib. So
Mm-hmm.
I just don't. I can't tell people that loose rig is the right thing to do. So
Mm-hmm.
so let's sail
That
fast at high wind. Uh,
that's kind of like Jeff Linton is kind of the king of that, right? Jeff and Amy, they're pretty light and they sail really well, I thought, in the higher breeze, right, Brian?
yep.
And obviously you have to know how to depower your boat. You have to know like the Vang, like we were talking about, and the Cunningham, and maybe rolling the board up a little bit, things like that. But also, I think one thing that gets kind of left off that list is if you're sailing really light and in heavy air, you're going to have to be feathering the boat quite a bit. So you got to kind of pick and choose which lanes you can sail in. If someone's heavier above you, they're pretty easily might be able to roll you. So knowing what lanes you can live in and knowing which ones you want to set up in, knowing that you're going to might be sailing a little higher and slower at times. Do you have anything that besides that, Brian?
No, not really. Just getting towards the end here, wrapping up. Just took a quick
Yeah.
look at the chat there. So not, I was just pretending you were my wife and I was ignoring you. So let's see.
That's normal for me anyway.
So last thing is it beneficial to adjust the outhaul upwind and changing wind. The outhaul is an unused weapon. I think people tend to have it a little bit too loose. Um, you know, every time you ease the outhaul, the lower third of your main is going to get deeper. Okay, so if you're in an airplane and the flaps come out, you're going to get a lot more lift, but you're going to go slower. So when you ease your outhaul, I always think about putting the flaps on in an airplane, and that I'm going to gain height, I'm going to gain lift, but I'm going to go slower. So if I'm trying to pinch somebody off on my weather, just off weather me, I'll ease the outhaul and round up the lower part of the leech and try to get more height and slow them down. If I'm trying to get around a mark and I'm kind of maybe not making it, and I'm 5 boat lengths away, I'll ease the outhaul and go a little slower and try to get a little bit more height. So it's a thing you can use as a kind of weapon. Basically, one thing I would recommend to people is not to keep the outhaul too eased. There's plenty of depth built into the sail. If there wasn't, it would invert. like those pictures showed you earlier. And so when you're looking at the sail at shoulder height, it looks pretty flat, but when you start to look at the vertical curvature, it's there's plenty of depth in the sail. So you don't need to have the outhaul ease to power it up. All it does is creates a slower, higher pointing kind of scenario, which is fine. You can use it as a weapon, but the boat, remember we said the faster you go, the more pressure you get against the centerboard, the higher you're going to go. So, and the last one, when should I replace my sails? And can I do that one at a time? You know, my old thing is, I think I think that sails should be replaced, probably once every 2 or 3 races. But that said, kidding aside, I think the main sails on a Flying Scot, well cared for, can hang in there for a while and be taken care of. I think that jibs they're high aspect and they're hanging out there by themselves and they don't have any support in the foot and they get tired a little bit quicker. They get a lot of hard sheeting on a jib, especially when the breeze comes on. So can you replace one sail at a time? Absolutely. A lot of people will go a couple seasons with a main and replace a jib every year or every 18 months. And I think that's not unreasonable for a lot of fleet racers. I think a lot of the championship level racers are replacing their sails every year. And, but it's not a criteria. I think that if you're ever looking for an edge and you think you want to try to, invest a little bit of money, a new jib is always going to be your first kind of thing to get going faster. It's least expensive of the sails to replace and probably will have the biggest impact initially. And then the main, and then, spinnakers with the RX and the radial designs, they last pretty long. They start to change shape just like any other nylon will. But long story short is you could get away for an older spinnaker, especially at fleet level or regional level racing for quite a while. So you agree with that, Jackson? You think that's bad advice?
No, I think everything you said was great. Besides every 2 to 3 races. I mean, come on, you're right and wrong about that one. There's
Uh,
certain regattas where I wish I had a new jib after a
yeah.
few races and I trash it. But I think everything you said is totally correct. And I think a lot of the emphasis for keeping your sails fresh is putting on maintenance and making sure you're not cramming them into a ball when you take the sails down or hoist them up, being kind to them.
All right, so we've overdone our time, and I apologize. I didn't think we'd have as much banter going back and forth, but Jackson, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you. Um, uh, Appreciate. There's Jackson said, go find a picture of you sailing. So that's Laura Jeffers and I at
Yeah.
Davis Island this year, and that's Jackson when he was much
That's a long
younger.
time ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, no
much younger.
beard. That was in the middle of college. That was
So,
a Lipton Cup, GYA Lipton Cup, and I think it was actually November because of a hurricane.
okay.
So it got pushed back.
Well,
That was a good regatta. That was a fun time.
oh,
Good
you
old
look
red
friendly
boat.
there. So there's a scan to the Flying Scot North Sails webpage. It's got our tuning guide on it. The other thing, real quick, anybody come to the Nationals, my loft here is about 15 minutes, 20 minutes away from Cedar Point Yacht Club. If you come in on Friday early or you want to hang out afterwards, you want to come visit the facility here, see what we do here, manufacturing and distribution wise. It's the main hub for North Sails in North America, and we'd love to have you come and visit us. Just reach out to me and we'll kind of schedule a quick visit, and hopefully we will see a bunch of you at the North Americans in June. So
We can see the loft behind you a little bit, right, Brian? You're sitting in a pit. That's pretty cool. Big space.
Everybody went home except for me.
Yeah, I
So
know you're still there, huh? Good on
anyway,
you.
but anyway, Jackson, thank you. It's a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks, and thank everybody for joining us. Hopefully you learned something. If not, hopefully at least you're entertained for an hour tonight. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to Jackson and myself. If we didn't answer your question or didn't get to it, there's our emails. Really easy to reach anybody at North Sails. First name, last name at northsails.com. Love to chat with you and, talk about sailing. So Jackson, with that, we're going to sign off. And also thanks to Riley behind the scenes running the Zoom for us, taking some time there up at their underneath her North Sails moniker, making sure good things happen here. So, all righty, we're signing off and good night. Thanks, Jackson.
Thank you, Brian. Thank everyone for coming.